Reddit story time. Ex-inmates of Reddit, what was the stupidest thing you've seen a new inmate do on his first day in prison? Worked as a corrections officer, guy got busted for sexual assault of a minor, figured everyone else in the tank was on similar charges so began talking openly about it feeling he was safe. We had to subdue 5 guys who jumped him in the rec yard. Guy was sent to the hospital as he was fairly unresponsive. He was sent to protective custody after that. Not an ex-inmate, but an ex-CO. Dude came in on drug charges. First thing he does upon walking into the pod is announce loudly enough that I could hear that he got drugs past the dipsits in intake. Yeah, not the brightest bulb, that one. Kid gets booked in, hits the unit and starts borrowing food and other commissary items. Before he knew it he was $200 in the hole. Problem is, in jail and prison, most people who are willing to loan items out expect 2 or 3 of the same item back. You know, interest. Very easy way to get yourself indebted is by borrowing any food or other items. Never get in debt while incarcerated. California prison, some Hispanic kid came in who was from Southern California, so he was obligated to run with the Southern Mexicans. While he was on the yard he was talking about how someone should stab a particular guard because said guard was being disrespectful, so the Southern Mexican shot caller made him do it since he was talking about it. That's the reason you never speak on shit in prison unless you are ready to do it yourself. He got a life sentence when before he was only doing 8 years. Told a kid there was a pool out at yard. Guard saw him waiting to go out in shorts with his shower towel and asked him what he was doing. Kid said, "I'm gonna go swimming outside, it looks nice." Don't think I've laughed so hard in my life, it's unoriginal but always funny. We had an infamous repeat visitor in my prison. Let's call him Lenny. Lenny would get out, get roped into some dumb shit, and be the fall guy for said dumb shit. He'd come home as he called it. Lenny was also a creature of habit. When he first went in, COs being abusive, verbally at minimum, was the norm. So years later when a CO said to Lenny, "Lenny, I need you to get out of your cell for a check," Lenny would reply with something like, "Fuck you, CO." Because Lenny couldn't understand their authority if they were nice. The appropriate way to speak to Lenny was, "Lenny, get your fat ass out of that cell before I drag you out," in an authoritative voice. And Lenny would comply with a proper, "Yes, sir." Lenny one time was quite happy with a little female CO, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, 120 pounds soaking wet. He promptly picked her up and gave her a big hug. Lenny was a good 6 feet 5 inches, 300 pounds. I've never heard a person yell like she did. The things she threatened to do would have Lucifer taking notes. Lenny smiled and complied. Lenny also discovered a sure way to get out of day room duty. If he didn't feel like it, he would get himself a pencil, get the patrolling CO's attention, whip out his, quite admittedly impressive trouser hop. Seen that picture of the black guy naked sitting on a bed that's been photoshopped into the hospital picture? Think that, except white. Smiling, he would insert the pencil eraser deep into his giant meat log and lay about half of it onto the table. He'd yell, "Hey Colorado," before promptly punching his dick, and with an audible snap, the pencil would break. Lenny would get to go to medical for a few days and not have to clean the day room. Lenny stopped showing up a few years back. He was in his late 50s. We're pretty sure he's no longer with us, but nobody really wants to look it up to confirm. Skinny kid, hippie type got busted with some weed. Someone else on the range was getting beat up for something or other and the kid tried to intervene. Just said, "Hey, leave him alone." Got beat to within an inch of his life in the shower. Pro tip, in jail, mind your own business. Got busted for smoking weed with 2 buddies. When we put in the holding cell one of them wanted mark the event by carving his name in the paint on the cell door. When we got put in a cell later they came back and took him to solitary for a week. How much weed do you need to smoke to end up in solitary? When the skinny little street thug white kid walked across the yard and threw my neighbor at a bench full of full-blown Crips. Didn't see him much after that since dawn. Father-in-law did 12 years on a second-degree murder rap back in the very early 90s. He told me that one time this new guy plopped himself down at the Hells Angels table and started eating breakfast. When he was told to move, he ignored them. After breakfast, the COs ended up having to cut through about 6 rolls of duct tape to get the guy loose. He never sat near the Haas again. For some reason I didn't expect the Hells Angels to respond like Jock Brothers. Not me but my dad. Guy came in bragging about what he did. Said he was a monster and the toughest guy around and that he could take anybody on in the pen. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, he apparently was a pretty big and tough guy. Come to find out he was in for the assault, then murder of a woman and her child. He might have been big and tough, but not after 5 big guys beat the absolute shit out of him and practically killed him. As most of you know, the one thing all prisoners can agree on is that anyone who messes with kids or women are on an immediate hit list. Edit, the women thing might have just been a rule amongst him and the people he ran with. So my dad's currently convicted and the craziest story he's told me is one of the newer inmates was young and arrogant. Always spouting off bullshit about how unaccountable he was. Then one day, another inmate packed up his items, went into the younger inmate's cell and tried to strangle him. The younger inmate was that fucking annoying. He survived. The attempted murderer is in max, and when the younger inmate came back from the hospital he was still spouting bullshit. Just going to generalize. Small town folk who are used to being the biggest and baddest. Big fish small pond types who think they are going to be king when they walk in. They usually are dominated pretty quickly. Dominated being either beat or made into a bitch. Best bet if you go to prison, hopefully no one ever goes, is unless you know someone well connected on the inside. Just keep your head down, focus on yourself, and do your time. It's going to be boring, menial, and seemingly endless, but you don't want to get caught up in any gang stuff or be snitching. There's a code and system in prison that needs to be followed, and if you walk in like king shit of Turd Hill when you are a nobody, you will learn real quick that you ain't nothing. Here's one from a good friend of mine, we'll call him T, who spent half his life inside. Picked a fight with the local inmates over something minor to establish dominance. The guy was European, and Europeans were kept separate from locals with good reason. There would be full-scale gang wars between the two sides now and again within the prison. None of his fellow Europeans backed him up. Hell, some of them even jumped in on kicking the ever-loving shit out of the newbie. T doesn't think the guy made it. Pretty much just hearing younger guys like trying to impress. Odds are if you a real G then you can tell who's who. The ones who get caught lying are the ones who have the hardest time because trust level is low to begin with, include lies and yay. I'd say this is mostly for JDCs, but county jails and prisons have the same problem, I'm sure. New dude got sentenced and came over to the felony pod. 2 levels. We're playing spades, and this dude says, "Man, I can't wait to get out of here." My partner in spades asked how much time he has. New dude says something, "Man, I got 4 months." My spade partner just stood up, smacked the cards out of his hand. Told him to STFU, and stop bitching about 4 months. He then said, "I got ducking life, now what?" and proceeded to beat his ass. CO took his sweet ass time too. Long but funny story. I worked for a PD. We arrested a local regular on an outstanding FTA warrant. The guy was always a pitter. The county jail was full, so we're contracted with an adjacent county jail nicknamed the Workhouse. It was old and nasty and had a much tougher urban clientele. It took about 45 minutes to drive there, and on the way, the prisoner was being chatty. He asked me to do him a favor when we got to the jail, which was don't put me in with any of those GDN. We get to the jail and sit the prisoner on the bench. There is a large black woman working the intake desk, and she and I process the paperwork. 15 minutes later I'm headed out the door when I stop and look at the prisoner on the bench. I turn to the woman and say, "Oh yeah. I forget. He has a request. The prisoner starts violently shaking his head no. The woman chuckles and says oh yeah. What's that? I repeat his request that he doesn't want to be put in with any GDN. Her eyes get real big and she smiles at me saying yes sir. I'll take care of that. The prisoner looked like he was going to pass out. She immediately called for 2 guards who came from the back dragging logging chains. These were 2 black guys who looked like they were linebackers in the NFL. I smiled at the prisoner and walked to my cruiser.